Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us. I'd like to call to order the study session for the City Council for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for May 6, 2019. And for the record, I'd like to enter that all of our councilors except for Councilwoman Davis are here with us tonight, so thank you all for being here. As we do with most of our meetings, we will start with citizens' right to speak. And our first speaker is John Barry. John, when you get to the microphone up here at the podium, please adjust it so it's comfortable for you to speak. Give us your first name and last name, and spell your last name, and give us your address, and then you're ready to go.
Hi, everyone. My name is John Barry. You spell my last name B-E-R-R-Y. I don't live in the city, but I do own a business in the city, and that address is 4805 Van Gordon Street, Wheat Ridge, Colorado, 8003, District 4. The reason I have come to appeal to you guys today is to talk about item number 1, section 2, the 2018 building code update. Currently, the building code does not allow for a certain type of extraction to occur in Wheat Ridge. There are some extractors that are already grandfathered into in prior to a code went into effect. And they're currently doing this, and I want to be able to do it as well. So the specific code is 502.20, and is related to marijuana occupancies. I'll read a small excerpt from it to give you an idea of what the problem is. For the purpose of application of requirements of this code, occupancies involved in the water-based and non-combustible solvent-based extraction of hash oil shall be considered to be hazardous occupancies and shall be subjected to the requirements for such occupancies as set forth in this code. All other occupancies involved in the extraction of hash oil are not permitted. I've been in business since 2015, and at that time we worked with the building department to perform a certain type of extractions that met these requirements. Since then, the business, the marijuana business and market in general has changed, with most people switching to combustible extractions, such as butane and propane, which in our current code does not allow for that here. One of the problems is that process is much, much cheaper, and it's very hard to compete with that type of extraction. One of the main concerns originally when this was imposed in 2015 was a safety issue. Since then, multiple states and cities have adopted this use, and there are many, many studies out there that show that it's actually safe and not harmful for the public. To go along with that, there's a significant investment that goes into making this process safe, which I have looked into, and I've spoken with many companies that perform those safety measures, and I would be willing to make that investment into the community, into my business to allow for this. One thing that it would help benefit the city, it would allow me to bring more employees to the city. I currently have a staff of 13, and if I was allowed to do this type of extraction, I could easily double my business size. And one of the differences about my business than most marijuana businesses is that the turnover rate for my employees is very, very low, where the turnover rate in most cities is incredibly high for most businesses. Most of my employees have actually moved from other cities to Wheat Ridge and are contributing to the local economy here. I think that's one of the benefits, but it would also allow me to do improvements to the building. It's actually located next to the current, the brand new station and line that just came in. It's not directly on the route that you guys are planning for the particular park, but it's in that neighborhood, and I know that's something that you guys care about and want to make look better, and it would be something that I could help contribute if I were able to make this investment into my business and potentially make more revenue. I talked to Mr. Johnstone about this in particular, and he mentioned bring this particular topic up tonight. And so I really hope that you will read over my pamphlet that I left on each of y'all's table and consider making this change. It's something that's not dangerous to the community, and Yeah, I would really appreciate it if you would at least take time to look into it and think about it. I'll be staying the whole meeting, so if at any time you have any questions about the particular methods or the safety measures and precautions that I will be taking, I'd love to answer those questions. And I have also attached my email and my phone number that you can reach out to me at to answer any of those questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Berry is the only person that I had signed up to speak. Is there anyone who hasn't signed up who would like to speak at this time? Okay. Please give us your first name and last name, spell your last name, and give us your address.
My name is Odarka Figlus, Figlus, and my address is 10580 West 34th Avenue. And I'm speaking about the affordability issue that you're going to be talking about tonight. I'm very glad that you're talking about this. I think it's an incredibly important issue, and it's a huge metro-wide issue. So I hope this is just the first of many conversations that you're going to be having about this, since clearly this is not something that we can solve alone, but need to work with all of our metro partners. You know, I tried to get a little bit more informed before I came to this meeting, and sometimes it's hard to find information. I'm sure it's on there someplace, and I'm sure you already have a census of all the housing types that we have and how many we have, ranging from the least expensive to the multi-million-dollar homes. And because I'm curious to know what that balance is in Wheat Ridge, whether it's rental, owner-occupied or rentals, and in particular how that compares to other communities in the metro area. Are we equally balanced as they are? Are we skewed in one direction? We keep kind of hearing about that, but it would be nice to see those statistics, which I'm sure you already have. You know, I think that this is a topic that needs a lot of analysis, and I must say that I was a little surprised that a developer is giving the presentation tonight, even though I've seen their pictures and their website. It looks really great, but I think still this is a wider issue that probably we should be looking at a little bit more impartially, and maybe give an economist or somebody else to come in to talk about this. And just one thing I wanted to say, that looking at the presentation, it seems like there's a presumption that those of us that are less wealthy need to be in multifamily housing, that somehow we don't deserve or don't probably want single-family housing, and certainly don't want to have single-family housing on large lots. And I think that's just not the right assumption. There's a lot of us that are out there that can't afford a lot, but would love to live in a small house on a large lot. I know when I was in my 20s or 30s, I would have loved to have bought a house like that. So please, when you're looking at this, please don't look just at density. Maybe Wheat Ridge could actually kind of be on the forefront here and be the place where people could buy a house on a small house on a large lot that's affordable and not have to move out to Bennett, as I know some people have, to get that semi-rural atmosphere. There's a comment in the presentation that I definitely agree with, and they said that we should look at preserving what we have, and maybe, again, instead of looking to see how we can maximize number of units, see if we can keep those lots affordable for families. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who has not signed up who would like to speak tonight? Please come to the podium, give us your name and address.
Good evening, Mayor Starker and Council. My name is Rachel Haltine, and I live at 4690 Balsam Street. And I too would like to speak on affordable housing in Wheat Ridge. Like the previous speaker, I'm really excited to see that it's something that the city is engaging in a discussion with and taking a pretty comprehensive view of. The cities around us are also grappling with it. It is regional, but we're Wheat Ridge, so we're part of a region, but we have our own unique identity. I wanted to share a couple of thoughts. I recognize, having worked in some affordable housing development in my previous career, it is big and complicated, and so to get the perspective of a developer who would be a key partner in any type of successful, significant investment in that is really important, because if we don't understand that part of it, we can't really take that big step. But I think we're also in a great position right now to look at some smaller incremental steps around retaining the affordability that's here. One of the best things we can do for affordability is keep people in their homes as long as possible. And there's a couple of great smaller programs that are being run in cities around us, including Arvada, where they are actually leveraging the housing market boom that we're seeing here in Wheat Ridge. And they're doing some in lieu of fees that are then translating to microgrants to keep seniors in their homes through home adaptations. And then there's also different policy things we could do to retain affordability for people who are already here. So I think, as we take this approach and look at the big solutions, we shouldn't not also be taking advantage of some shorter term, smaller things that we can do that are really servicing the people who are already here and who have enjoyed the affordability that Wheat Ridge has provided them, and to make sure that they aren't victims of the housing boom that we see. So how can we leverage the boom to keep our people here who already love it? And then how can we leverage the boom to bring great new people to our city? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Mr. Figlis?
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Ihor Figlis. I live at 9775 West 36th Avenue. One of the things that's been troubling me for a number of years about development, and I hope you take this into consideration, is we don't have limitless resources in terms of natural resources, specifically water. And I know that that's a very tough thing to deal with. It's citywide. There's a problem. You read about the aquifers being depleted in the areas around Denver and everything else. And we've experienced, having lived here, we've experienced times of shortages of water when the reservoirs weren't full. And I hope that you pay attention to that. I mean, it's not just it's very unfortunate that Denver has become so popular. We have great climate, and those of us who grew up here, we love living here. We've attracted people, and it's causing an economic shift in our area. But we really do need to pay attention to the fact that we have limited resources, and we really need to manage our future growth in order to make sure that we don't end up between a rock and a hard place farther down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who hasn't signed up tonight to speak who would like to speak at this time? Thank you. We will close our public comment. Thank you to our speakers. We will go to item number 1, staff reports. Mr. Goff.
Thank you. We have Ken Johnstone, our Community Development Director, and Randy Slesser, our Chief Building Official here this evening.
Johnstone.
Thank you, Mayor. Here for really, we've captured or couched this as a staff report. Obviously, we're just looking to give a real quick update on a process for this year, moving forward to adopt the most recent versions of the International Building Codes. And so we really are focused not so much on substance tonight, but just get council's blessing on endeavoring into that process and describe to you how we'd like to involve the Building Code Advisory Board and the public in general, the contracting community, et cetera. So as Patrick noted, Randy Slesser is here I'm going to hand it over to him momentarily. Randy is the director of the Colorado office of Charles Abbott Associates, the group that we contracted with just over a year ago, beginning in March of last year as our fully outsourced building division. So we've been at it for a little over a year. I think it's going well. We're getting good feedback, and Randy has been part of the team since April of 2017 when we originally contracted with Charles Abbott Associates for our contract services before changing models. So he's been a face of as the CBO, as it were, since the start of our relationship with Charles Abbott, and I'm going to turn it over to him to talk about what we think is going to be the process.
Good evening, everyone. So just a little brief
background, the city building division that we enforce was known as international building codes, as do a vast majority of other cities among the Front Range. The international codes are drafted by an organization known as the ICC, International Code Council. The codes are published every 3 years. We currently are adopting them every 6 years here in the Wheat Ridge. So as Ken mentioned, we proposed have the City Council adopt an ordinance to implement the 2018 International Building Codes along with some various local amendments. And with council support, our next step would be a preliminary meeting with the Building Code Advisory Board, followed by a widely advertised meeting with contractors, developers, and licensed design community. We would anticipate a more comprehensive study session, check-in with the Building Advisory Board and City Councils once we have the initial meeting with them and public meeting.
Yes, so we're just really here to get council support for that process moving forward, but glad to answer any questions, of course.
Questions from council? Have you put together a schedule on what the process looks like going forward, a timeline?
We've not yet.
Okay. Is that something that will happen before the end of 2019, or will this go, you think, into 2020?
We would hope to have the codes adopted in 2019.
2019, okay.
In the next several months, we plan to go out.
The next several months?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Mr. Matthews?
I'm sure we always, have we use that as our base document, the UBC, but we have local ordinances that we change. Do we have a compiled version of those, and then how does the new version of the UBC affect those codes that we've changed in order to meet our individual needs as a city? And are we going to update that list of?
So at this time, we will be making some updates to the currently adopted versions of the code. There's not a lot of changes we're going to make. We're going to keep a lot of the adopted changes the same. But there are a few minor changes which we're not ready to share right now. We're waiting for some input from the Building Code Advisory Board and local.
Does UBC, when they put out a new version, give you a list of the changes from previous versions so you can?
They do.
We've already looked at what's in 12, so that would, can we just look at those changes so we know, instead of having to review the whole however many pages of UBC there is, we just have to look at a subset of what they changed.
They do publish documents that state the major changes from certain code years. They don't jump 6 years, so it would be from like the 2015 version to the 2018 version. But there is published documents that do kind of give you the major changes here.
Thank you.
We'll be able to share with council if they like.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Mr. Pond?
So I see some of the proposed changes. I assume that basically you'd be looking at some of these changes as you moved it through the different building code advisory, if you brought it back to us, and as well with the developer community. And I see that the one that we did have some public comment tonight on here is one. So I assume that you'll be documenting the changes and the past decisions as we move forward.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Matthews?
How does this affect the grandfather concept? If we make some changes that current buildings don't adhere to, are they sort of grandfathered in, and are they subject to new inspections? As a for instance, when I got a new water heater, all of a sudden an inspector was walking around my upstairs floor looking for some radon detectors or something and wouldn't sign my paperwork until I got updated with radon and detectors, which I thought was a little weird,
Yeah, more than likely you're speaking about carbon monoxide detectors.
or carbon monoxide.
Which currently is a state law that you're required to have them in every home.
But are inspectors allowed to go through and update, just when they come to check a water heater, are they allowed to go to another floor and check for other things?
Not without permission, though.
Well, they sure did.
But we're not checking for other things besides.
And that's my question. When you update this stuff,
Yeah.
are inspectors going to be looking for these changes and then forcing people to adhere to the new law or new codes?
So typically, anytime something is new or altered, then the newer codes apply. Anything that's existing, they're like grandfathered, and like you said.
Thank you.
And if I might, Mr. Matthews, I mean, I think the carbon dioxide detectors are kind of a one-off thing. It's a retroactive requirement. And again, that's something that the state has adopted just because it's a fairly minor public safety item, and you were getting a hot water, so a combustible gas facility installed. So a little bit of a unique situation.
Any additional questions? Okay. Well, Mr. Johnstone, Mr. Slusher, thank you very much. We'll look forward to your continued reports. All right. Item number 2 is from our partners at Xcel Energy. Mr. Goff, do you want to introduce this one?
Sure. Preston Gibson is here this evening. He is our area rep from Xcel, and he is here this evening to speak to Xcel's new energy vision plan for 2050, I believe, 2030 and 2050.
Thank you for the introduction. I am Preston Gibson with Xcel. My address is 5460 West 60th Avenue, Arvada, and I don't know how well you're going to be able to see that. It's kind of bright on the screen, but I want to thank you for your time this evening. And we've got some really important news in terms of where we're headed with as a company towards becoming more and more renewable, more and more carbon-free. And as I start this presentation, I did want to just sort of recognize Wheat Ridge for what you've done. I know that you're one of the first cities that moved toward LED lighting, so you now have LED lighting in your city, which is saving you money and saving carbon. Also, I remember coming out maybe a year and a half or so ago and talking to your sustainability committee. At that time, they were thinking about doing Partners in Energy. And you moved forward with Partners in Energy, and I understand you already have an energy action plan and are planning to soon begin implementation of that plan. So as a city, you're going above and beyond what some of the other cities are doing in the area that I serve. I serve a 5-county region, by the way. So I just want to congratulate you on that work and tell you where we're headed as a company, because we're headed more towards 100% carbon free by 2050. We think we can get there. So a little bit about our company. Many of you know us as Public Service Company. We still are Public Service Company here in Colorado, Public Service Company of Colorado. We're an operating company of Xcel Energy. We have about 1.5 million electric customers and about 1.5 million natural gas customers. That is for our entire 8-state region. So in terms of our priorities, we really have 3 priorities. Number 1, lead the clean energy transition. Number 2, enhance the customer experience. And number 3, keep bills low. I think everybody wants to keep bills low. I remember years back, actually before I started working for the company, that our goals, our priorities were low cost and reliability. We didn't have anything about enhancing the customer experience or even adding renewables. There really wasn't any such thing as a utility getting involved in renewables, but now it's all shifted, and this is where we're headed today. And so I want to talk, most of the presentation, at least the majority of it, is relative to our carbon vision. As we say, job number 1 is carbon reduction, and number 2 is protect cost and reliability and advanced technology. I'll tell you a little bit about advanced technology. So we call this our bold vision for where we're headed in the future. And we've made great strides in that direction now, but sometimes you might say, well, why? Why is Xcel actually doing this? And I can tell you the reason primarily that we're doing this. Number one, it's good for our climate. We know that. It's good to have less pollution in the air. We know that. But it's where our customers want us to go. Our customers, our communities are saying, can you move towards renewable energy and carbon reduction and do it as quickly as you possibly can? And again, some of it's relative to just cleaning the air, some of it's relative to meeting various targets, but that's why we're headed in this direction primarily. Just if you're looking at Colorado, where we've been, about 2005, you can see that most of our electricity was generated with coal, 65%. And the only renewable program I think we had at the time, we just hadn't quite started our solar program, so we had wind source that was implemented back in the mid-1990s. And so that 4% you see there is probably all wind. And then if you move to 2017, we have 44% coal, 28% natural gas, 29% renewables. You can see where we're headed. We're headed rapidly in the direction of adding more renewables and cutting coal basically in half, from about half from where it is currently today. What we're trying to implement today, and what we are implementing and have been starting in the last couple of years, is what we call our Colorado Energy Plan. And our Colorado Energy Plan is where we are going to be adding 1,100 megawatts of wind, which is huge. It's like a couple of large power plants. We're going to be adding about 700 megawatts of solar. And we also are going to be having 275 megawatts of battery storage to back that up. We all hear about batteries. Why don't we use batteries? And we are using batteries. We have a couple of test pilots. We're currently underway that were part of our Energy Future program that we talked about, I think, a couple of years ago when I was here. We have those currently in operation, and they're being tested. But we are also adding a massive amount of battery storage on our system. And when we announced it last year, I believe it was last year, it was more battery storage than was entirely under construction for all the utilities in the country. So it's a massive amount. Just to put that in perspective, it's a massive amount of battery storage. So here's what we're looking to do, leading the clean energy transition. You can see where we were in 2005. We look at that as our baseline year. We are a national leader in renewable energy. We've been a national leader in wind for 12 or 13 years in a row now. We want to reliably integrate renewables. We're retiring our coal fleet early. I didn't mention that there are 3 power generating units in our Comanche power plant in Pueblo that are run by coal. And 2 of those 3 we're going to retire early over the next 5 or so years. And then we're going to add more renewables down in that area to sort of balance out the load we're taking off from coal, and they're going to get more wind and solar. But that's part of our strategy as well, is to start removing coal from our system. We already have removed all the coal from our system. I've only worked for the company since late 2010, and in that time period, we've taken out all the coal in our region. The most of the generation was coming from our power plant, our Cherokee power plant, which is in North Denver, and now all of that is gone except for there's generation with the highest level of technology, natural gas. But the coal is gone, and natural gas has about half the carbon emissions as coal generates. So if you start looking around at what are the community goals that we're looking to help achieve, and this goes back to when I said we're trying to do what our communities are asking us to do, you can see that we have some of the other states in which we operate, but if you look just at Colorado, you can see the left column is carbon reduction, the right column is renewable energy goals. And they're kind of all over the map, but clearly you can see the direction is going towards 80 to 100% reduction by anywhere from 2025 to 2050. So clearly our communities have aspirational goals that we move very quickly in this direction. Now our modeling and what we were proposing to do to move in this direction was verified by climate scientist modeling. He actually works at the University of Denver. He did a very thorough study, and based on his analysis, we can meet that 2 degrees centigrade warming target easily. We even may reach 1.5%. There's international talk now about not raising temperature levels more than 1.5% or 1.5 degrees centigrade from pre-industrial levels. So we think we can probably meet that as well, but clearly we're going to be able to meet the Paris climate agreement target of 2 degrees. So it's a message that resonated. We had our CEO, our corporate CEO, come down from Minneapolis last December, and he made the announcement that we were going to be 80% carbon free by 2030 and 100% carbon free by 2050. And of course it was major national news, and we got about 60 million social media hits when we did that message, which is pretty incredible. So how do we plan to get there? Invest in wind and solar. We call it steel for fuel. Currently, much of our electricity is generated with fuel like natural gas. A lot of it's still generated with coal. But more and more we're looking at the steel towers, the wind, right? The wind towers is our steel that we use for fuel, because the wind is actually the fuel, but we look at it as a steel for fuel system. We like to help our customers manage energy usage and bills through efficiency and rebate programs. We have some very significant programs. I'll spend a minute or two on that later. Maintaining carbon-free nuclear plants in Upper Midwest. We don't have any plans currently, and none that I know of, about adding nuclear here, but in Colorado, but certainly we have a fleet in the Upper Midwest, and we're planning to continue to maintain them. Transforming the energy grid by retiring or reducing the operation of aging coal plants, and so on. I just talked about that. The 2050 goal is essentially an aspiration to be carbon-free. We're going to need to continue to invest in R&D and technology to get us there. Batteries are not capable of doing that. There needs to be additional research. And the costs of, so the challenges of 100% renewable, you notice I'm talking about 100% carbon reduction or carbon-free. There are challenges to make it 100% renewable. First of all, it gets incredibly expensive. Once you start getting over 60 to 80%, the incremental cost is very, very expensive to go to 100%. And I have a slide on that too, but I'll tell you that at 100%, we have to overbuild the grid significantly if we're going to be 100% renewable. We'd have to overbuild the grid. Our research and other research that we have looked at says that we should probably overbuild our grid by about 8 times as much energy as we actually need, just so we can have enough background energy, base energy to operate. And it just gets to be the point where it's too expensive to do. So we have an aspirational goal of getting to 24/7 carbon-free technology. Some of it's carbon capture. We could do carbon capture. Some of it's doing creating through electrolysis. You could use either solar or wind and use through electrolysis, create hydrogen, and then use that gas, store that gas for use later. There's deep rock geothermal. There's potential advanced nuclear. There's a lot of research going on in that area. And so there are many things that are being analyzed and researched. The technology isn't quite there today, but between now and 2050 is a long time, and we think we're going to be there. This just shows you where we're putting a lot of our energy. I mentioned 1,100 megawatts of wind, 700 of solar, and this shows you the locations where it's proposed to be built. If you look at in Kit Carson County, we just recently, in that county and in Cheyenne and Lincoln and Elbert, completed our Rush Creek Wind Farm, and it went online last December. And that project's one of these great stories I like to tell, because it's one of those things where everybody kind of wins. You love to hear these win-win. This is a win-win-win story, because we essentially bought all the turbines from Vestas, so all that equipment is actually made here in Colorado. It's a $1 billion project. So we invested all that money here in Colorado. We're building the wind farm in Colorado. And so The farmers benefit from that. They benefit from the royalties they get off of having the turbines, and then they get to keep farming. In some cases, it gives them enough extra, whereas if they'd had a couple of difficult years, maybe they wouldn't be farming anymore. So it really helps our farmers. We pay taxes. We're going to pay tens of millions in taxes on that equipment here in Colorado, which benefits our communities. We get reliable renewable energy, and renewable energy is obviously where we're headed, as I've said a number of times. And it was also our lowest cost generation on our system when we put it in place. And so it was just one of those win-wins, and it's where we like to head, and we're always looking at costs. Now let's move to customer-focused programs. We have a number of different programs. You can if you're a customer and you want to have all of your energy developed or delivered through wind, we have a wind source program, and for an average home, it only costs you about $12 a month. Pay $12 a month, you're completely on wind. We have our solar rewards program, started in 2006. If you want to put solar panels on your rooftop, you can do that, and you're good to go. And we pay you for the excess energy you generate. Plus, we also pay you for the renewable energy credit. Solar Rewards Community is another program. If you're leasing a home or leasing a business, you can't put, or you don't want to put solar panels on your home, you could potentially buy it from a solar farm with our Solar Rewards Community program. Renewable Connect is another program we introduced last year, and we created 50 megawatts of solar electricity in a farm that's east of Parker, and that immediately sold out. We're generating that at a cost that we think over a 10-year period is going to be on parity with the energy cost that you're getting today and paying today, which is obviously a blend. Advanced grid intelligence and security. One thing that is important is to be able to seamlessly integrate all of these renewable energy sources. You know, when we built the grid, it was a one-way delivery system. We created electricity, we sent it. Now our customers are sending it back. And so in some cases, it's very difficult to accept as much electricity as is going on particular power lines at the time. Well, with this kind of technology, we can very, very closely monitor it and shift the electricity and make our system work a lot more smoothly. We also create a situation where if you have an outage at your home, we're going to know it very quickly, just immediately like that. We're going to be able to take care of it and maybe even reroute the electricity. We know where the larger outages are. Our system monitors that. But if you have an outage at your home, maybe we don't know about it today, but we will know about it in the future. And also this will enable us to have different kind of pricing programs where you can pay different rates for electricity. We currently have a pilot called our time of use program, where you pay more during the peak hours and less during the off hours than if you shift your energy usage. If you want to have some high energy usage like appliances, use those off hours where the electricity is cheaper, and that's a pilot program that we have. I think I've already covered energy storage pretty well. In terms of energy efficiency, we have about 150 programs, and they, over our entire 8-state region, have helped us avoid building about 20 power plants. Because if you don't use that electricity, you don't need to build those power plants. So where are we headed with some of the other technology? You know what? Where most of our pollution comes from now, more than any other source, is transportation. And as we start to create opportunities for electrifying vehicles, we're going to see more and more of that usage here. And we just got a bill through the legislature that is going to enable us to start building that infrastructure for electric vehicles. And we think this is the next opportunity to help with our carbon reduction. As I mentioned earlier, affordability is very important to us. Your bill has actually gone down over the past few years. This goes back to 2014, I see. And in Colorado, your electric bill is about 30% lower than the national average. And of course, if you go to certain areas, it's multiple times lower than the national average. So that's my presentation. I want to thank you for your time this evening. And I'm available if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gibson. Do we have questions for Mr. Gibson? Well, I guess you were pretty thorough with all of your explanation. Oh, Mr. Matthews.
I was waiting not to be first, but I guess that's not to be had. I'm kind of on the other side of this argument a little bit, and I'm going to try and stay away from climate change and whether or not the carbon's really that detrimental to us or not, because that's a whole subject all on its own. So I'm going to try and just limit myself to public service or Xcel energy. I've got several articles here, so if you'll bear with me.
I will, thank you.
The first one here says, Pueblo beware of Xcel's promise of economic development. And those were some promises that were made to those folks down there regarding the plants that are going to be closed. And it says, and I've highlighted some articles. It's just some portions of the article, so I'll go through them as quickly as possible. Colorado Public Utilities Commission staff doesn't trust Xcel's numbers, writing this in public comments. Staff is unable to conclude that the preferred CEPP is more likely than not to produce savings. The modeling results presented by the company contain a number of errors and a fundamental flaw which are discussed below that render the results suspect. It goes on, a coalition of ratepayers has proven repeatedly that Xcel's numbers are unreliable. Piesco's accounting has been riddled with biased assumptions, errors, and changes that are completely self-serving and call into question the company's credibility on numerous claims. Simply put, Piesco's numbers are not worthy or accurate. Article number 2 here. Xcel's plan to close Comanche power plants is a dud for Coloradans. And it says, if Xcel's primary goal is to save Colorado ratepayers money, it should voluntarily remove itself from consideration for building new facilities, James Taylor's writes. When a big out-of-state electric utility hatches a scheme to rake in over $100 million in profits off a captive Colorado customer base, Coloradans should be skeptical. Under its latest scheme, Xcel proposes to close 2 perfectly functioning power plants that generate 700 megawatts of power and then build a bevy of new facilities with 2,400 megawatts of generating capacity to replace them. Xcel estimates the new facilities will cost $2.5 billion to build, which would guarantee $250 million in profits for whomever builds them. Conveniently, Xcel, in addition to supplying power to Colorado customers, is also in the business of building new power facilities. Under its proposal, the company will have an opportunity to build 50 to 75% of the new power facilities. This scheme to save Coloradans money gives Xcel an opportunity to guarantee itself at least $125 million in additional profits by building the new facilities. And also, just over a decade ago, Xcel invested $190 million in ratepayer money in new clean emissions equipment to make the Comanche 1 and 2 units among the most environmentally friendly in the world. But we're going to shut them down 10 years early in order to go to renewables. Another article, Xcel's Colorado Energy Plan, a raw deal for taxpayers. And here's some real math. Even if we use Xcel's own self-serving numbers, the alleged cost savings are highly speculative and wouldn't be available until 2046, if ever. However, as you go on, we find out that although coal plants and the traditional plants that we've been using have a 50-year lifetime span, well, the new stuff that you're building is only 25. So you're projecting savings that kick in 25 years from now, but by then you'll be coming back and asking us to rebuild new facilities. Colorado's electricity rates continue to rise. Well, one of the reasons for that is that we're going to the renewables, which are not as cheap as the current way that we're building that. And there's so many different articles in here and stuff I highlighted. I'm not even going to go over it here, but it appears to me that we need to do more research into this. And then here's one, the Colorado PUC just enriched Xcel at the expense of ratepayers. Xcel again proved its preeminent power over every crack and crevice of state government when the governor's appointed Public Utilities Commission approved Xcel's plan to close 2 state-of-the-art power plants a decade before they're supposed to. At the same time, the PUC acknowledged Xcel was lying when they said the move would save us money. As one PUC commissioner said, his decision wasn't based on the numbers, but by something intangible. Since the sun doesn't always shine and wind doesn't always blow, Xcel convinced the PUC to let them build 3.5 times more power plant than what they are closing. This is to guarantee the same amount of consistent power output. So they're closing 660 megawatts of low-cost, dependable coal power to build 2,400 megawatts worth of inconsistent solar and wind power plants with the excuse that some of the new energy will be for projected future needs.
Mr. Matthews, do we have a question in there somewhere?
You just gave this guy unlimited time to present his side of the story. I'm presenting mine. I don't have slides, but I have comments.
It was a back and forth exchange. If you'd like to have an exchange with him, but we're not really going on to another debate on this subject.
So what you're saying is he can present whatever he wants to, and unless I can't present my side of the argument.
And if you want to put together a presentation, then we can schedule that into a study session if the council wants to do it. I thought you might have a question.
Yeah. Can't I debate it with him and bring out the other side of the argument and then let go back and forth? Until I present my side of the argument, how do we have a debate?
Well, Ms. Dozman.
I have a couple questions along those same lines, though. First, what would it cost? So we've seen a great presentation about the goals, but what is the estimated cost?
What we're committing to do is build this energy at a cost that is it's at least on parity with where we are today. We are not proposing to raise rates because of this. If rates go up at all, our company is committed to not raising them more than the consumer price index. In terms of the closing Comanche early, I probably could respond to that. Yeah, we're looking at closing 2 turbines early, 2 gas-fired turbines early, 2 units. But they were going to close anyway. Everybody knew that they were going to close. And what we've done is we've worked very closely with the elected officials there in Pueblo, and we've committed to creating jobs for the people that are no longer going to be working at that plant. Some of them will just retire. There'll be a certain amount of attrition, but we're going to find jobs for people there, and we're investing in their economy there. We're going to be investing in a solar farm there. We're going to be investing in a wind farm, and that's going to be right there in that county. So the reality is that you've got some articles. Not everybody agrees with us. I can tell you that. I understand. But the majority of our customers want us to move in the direction that we're headed. And in terms of profit, there are people throw out numbers about gigantic profits and so on. Our profit is completely controlled by the Public Utilities Commission. If we make a profit, we're not ever guaranteed to actually make a profit. But as a regulated monopoly, we agree to be regulated under that compact. So that's what we do. So, but at any rate, I understand your position, and some others have that position as well. But as a company, we're headed where most of our customers want us to go.
Okay, well, as far as your comments on closing those plants early, I would give you this analogy. I go out and buy a new car, and it's got a 20-year lifespan. I go park it in somebody's yard for the last 15 years of its lifespan. It's hardly economical if I don't depreciate it all the way out and get its full use. And as far as your idea of not making a profit, let me read this part of an article. Because Xcel is a regulated utility, its year-to-year profit margins are determined when the Public Utilities Commission sets the company's rate of return, usually near 10%. Its profits might not be as high as other corporations, but this capping mechanism is a trade-off for operating with little or no risk. That is, unless Xcel bypasses the capping mechanism through increasing the value of its assets based by building and owning power plants, transmission lines, and in the near future, industrial-sized batteries, not to mention if the utility retires a power plant before its scheduled closures, it has the ability to make the customers pay the remaining balance. Simply put, if Xcel is willing, it can cheat the system and operate with no risk while procuring massive returns on its investments. And to be frank, it is willing. Just look at the utility's proposed plan, where it wants to prematurely shut down 2 coal plants and move toward a portfolio made up predominantly of intermittent energy sources, solar and wind. So by building, you actually get paid to decommission those plants, do you not?
I don't know what the question is. I mean, do we get?
I asked, you actually get paid to decommission those plants, do you not?
In some way, the amortization is certainly worked into the financials. I'm not a financial person. I don't know how that actually is done, but clearly it is part of it. But let me also, if I might just say this, the renewables that when we went out for a bid for renewable energy last year, about a year ago, we got bids. We got 400 bids at prices that were unprecedented in terms of how low they were. That again made national news about how low the renewables are. That's why we're able to retire coal-fired generating units early and absorb those costs, because the cost of renewables has come down so much. Just in the last few years, solar's come down about 1/3, wind has come down about another 25%. So the prices continue to decline. And that's what makes this economically feasible for us to do this. And again, we're committed to keeping our bills low, our rates as low as possible, and not going beyond the consumer price index at any rate. Although you can see over the last 5-6 years, prices have actually gone down. The bill is the average electric bill in our service territory here in Colorado has gone down significantly.
Mine hasn't. Oh,
Ms. Hoppy?
crap, I lost my train.
I'd just like to say thank you to Mr. Gibson for coming and giving the presentation to us tonight. I do certainly look forward to 2050. I have just recently added solar panels to my home, and I really enjoy them. However, I would hope that you guys would look at your customer service a tiny bit as far as how long it takes once the panels are on the home to getting them online, because it's a pretty long amount of time to get them out there and get them hooked up. But other than that, I'm very excited about my solar panels. Thank you.
Mr. Matthews?
As far as I understand, and I'm breaking the first rule of being a lawyer here because I'm asking a question I don't have the answer for. But it's my understanding that renewables, air and wind and solar, are highly subsidized by the federal government. Is that correct?
There are tax incentives for those forms of energy. Yes.
And so taxpayers pay for that air, that I call it air, but that wind and solar, even though it's not in their bill, because we pay for it through income tax. Is that not correct?
I would assume that would be correct.
Well, how does the federal government get its money? Income tax.
I would assume that would be correct, but being that we're all paying those taxes as for a production tax credit and an investment tax credit for wind and solar energy, that if we ought to be able to take advantage of those the low-cost energy that's partly based on those tax credits and bring that energy here to Colorado.
But my point is, do you figure that taxes that we're paying that gets come back to the subsidy, do you figure that into our cost to get 1 megawatt of power?
And here's the thing, you talked about investment and us generating profit off our investments. Most of the energy that we buy today is from independent power producers. We don't actually own the assets. So we aren't making a rate off of those particular assets. And in fact, a bill just went through was on the last day of the legislature that requires us to, on a competitive basis, even the electricity, the generation that we'd like to build, we still have to go out and bid it out. And if we have independent power producers that can provide it cheaper to our customers, that's the way it's going to work. So,
Ms. Dozeman? Or Mr. Urban?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Gibson, for being here. I appreciate it. In looking at some of these numbers and understanding, you had mentioned about batteries, the technology necessary to store this electricity long enough for it to be economical to be used isn't currently available. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
And then my next question is, what does the Clean Air Act do as far as obstacles towards creating carbon sequestration efforts within coal-fired plants?
How does the Clean Air Act relate to carbon sequestration?
Correct. Does it hinder that, or does it help that, or?
I never had that question. I don't have an answer for you. I don't have an answer. I don't know.
I guess what I'd like to see is that at the same time we're working towards battery technology and understanding how to better implement renewable energies, that we're also looking at ways to make use of what we currently have available, whether it be through our current coal-fired power plants or better technology within carbon sequestration, so that we're able to sort of meet in the middle there. And because my other concern here is that at the same time you're going forward with renewables, the numbers and the use of electricity, is it going down or is it going up on a per person basis?
On a per person basis, it's actually going down.
So in that regard, it's almost as though Xcel Energy needs a battery of resources to sustain itself over the long term. If the electricity use per user is going down and there's a significant investment going forward, how do those two marry?
Yeah, and we have an expanding customer base which offsets that by a fair margin. But I don't know your answer to your carbon sequestration question. Let me tell you just as quickly about batteries. Currently, battery technology is such that you can get about a 4 to 8 hour battery. That polar vortex lasted, 72 hours? We need base load. We need to generate electricity when we don't have wind and we don't have sun. And we've got a gap of days where we need to do that, and we've got batteries that last 4 hours. So the technology just isn't there yet. I don't know if battery technology is going to be the final answer. It may be something we don't even know about today. But we think that hopefully through the support of R&D, we can get there to 100% carbon reduction by 2050.
And you mentioned the broad user base within your organization, but given the Western United States having sort of a dispersed market overall, how feasible are these steps? Because the energy markets are more dispersed here than they would be on the coast. So with a more concentrated market, you have the ability to trade and to have a more seamless market for energy. But how does that work within the Western United States when it isn't so concentrated?
I can't tell you how it works in the Western United States, but I can tell you that all the energy that we're creating, or either us or independent power producers that we're buying on contract, it's all produced here in Colorado. It's something we do here in this state. And so if you see companies that might even, in some cases, maybe even have more renewables on their system, maybe they're getting it from different places. We're doing it all here in Colorado. We're trying to limit air pollution, trying to meet the state implementation plan, help the state meet air quality state implementation plan. We can do that, we think, and we are helping do that with our reduction of coal generation and moving towards renewables.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Matthews.
You mentioned, the wind sometimes doesn't blow for days. How long does it take to power up a power plant? You've got an existing plant out here, and you're running off of wind power and stuff.
What kind of fuel? What are you talking about?
I'll take your choice, coal or natural gas.
Immediately with natural gas.
Okay, and with coal?
It takes longer with coal.
And so if the wind stops blowing today, you can power up a natural gas power plant?
Yes, we can.
Pretty quickly. That's a great improvement, because England just went like 5 days without the wind blowing, and they were out of power for a week.
Plan well.
Do you have to? That's one of the advantages then to natural gas? I understand that
it is.
in the past you had to keep a power plant actually kind of running in the background, even though you were running off wind power or solar.
Well, it doesn't actually run in the background. We power it down, and we also have done modeling with the National Center for Atmospheric Research, NCAR, up in Boulder, and we're now doing 7-day wind forecasting on 4-hour increments. So with this kind of technology, we can generally determine when the wind is going to stop blowing and start the gas-fired generation. So it's quite frankly, at this point in time, it's fairly seamless that we do that. We're also still adding natural gas. We're adding some natural gas, but it's mostly renewables. But our base load right now is almost entirely on natural gas. And, well, it's on coal, but obviously we're pulling back the coal mix for our generation.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Ms. Dozeman?
Yeah, so I guess when I was asking my cost question, I was more speaking to the infrastructure costs. Like, can you give an estimate of how much it would cost in order to get us on a renewable energy grid?
I don't know. I don't have those numbers with me.
Okay. Could you also maybe speak to how much this would impact the global temperature? I mean, I think you kind of touched on that at the beginning of your presentation.
Well, what we're trying to do is, what we are accomplishing is meeting the target of no more than 2 degrees centigrade increase from pre-industrial levels. You know, we think we can do that. In fact, our modeling gets us there. But it's not just Xcel Energy, as though there's a lot more to it than just us. There's, as I mentioned, transportation, you know, cars. There's other, you know, other forms of energy, other users of energy that we don't provide for. And there's other. Obviously, we're just a one utility here in Colorado. There's many other rural electrics in Colorado that provide electricity as well. So, but just from our standpoint, from what we're doing, our modeling indicates that we're clearly in the margins of getting us to at least 2%, probably 1.5%, 1 degrees rather.
Yeah, so I guess I'm trying to understand like the cost-benefit analysis of this, of, you know, how much is it going to raise the consumer's cost, how much is it going to cost in order to get on a full renewable energy grid versus really the impact that it's going to have.
As I mentioned earlier, I mean, one of the things that is important to our company is not raising the cost to our consumers. I mean, that's something that's important. And the only reason it makes sense now is the cost of renewables has come down so much due to technological advancements that the curves have crossed, and it's cheaper now to generate with renewables than it is with other forms of generation. And so by adding more renewables, we're not actually adding cost for the customer to absorb. We're actually decreasing the cost that customers pay.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Gibson. We appreciate your report.
Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you. We will move now to item number 3 on our agenda. This is affordable housing, and we have Shannon Cox-Baker with Urban Ventures.
Thought I had it loaded up, but.
Hi, good evening. I'm Shannon Cox Baker, Vice President of Development with Urban Ventures, and I'm a stand-in tonight for Susan Powers, President of Urban Ventures. She sends her regrets. She had a medical procedure today, so I am here in her place. And I love talking about affordable housing. I've been developing affordable housing for the better part of 10 years, and just want to thank you all for the opportunity to come and chat with you about the topic tonight. You're apparently in for a doozy following carbon neutrality, and nothing more innocuous than affordable housing to incite passion. So, I have a series of slides here for you. Obviously, I want to answer any questions that you have or have a dialogue with you about the things that are important to you, that are of interest to you. So bear with me as I sort of progress through some of the observations that I have come to for Wheat Ridge and the situation with housing here. And my apologies if I stumble a little bit or misspeak about some data. Clearly, a lot of this was pulled from the internet. It might not be the same data that you rely on for a full picture of what's happening in the housing continuum in Wheat Ridge. So every time I talk about affordable housing, I like to start with, well, why does this matter, and who's in it, and who are we talking about? In the industry of affordable housing, we really like to think about who needs affordable housing based on their income and based on their needs. And so this is sort of a national way of sort of breaking down household types that can benefit or from affordable housing. And obviously, starting at the top there, these are folks, these are sort of, again, nationally used terminology, those who are extremely low income. These are people who are absolutely in poverty. They usually have no income, but they can earn up to 30% of the area median income, and which in Wheat Ridge is around $19,000 a year. For an affordable rent for somebody who's earning $0 a month, or excuse me, a year to $19,000 a year, an affordable rent is about 30% of their income, so about $500 a month, which is obviously far less than probably what you could find in the rental market virtually anywhere in Colorado today. Who are our extremely low income residents? These are folks who are predominantly single-parent households, seniors who are on fixed income, folks who have special needs. These could be households that are held by, or heads of households who have cognitive or developmental disabilities, disabled veterans, and then certainly the homeless. And then sort of working up the spectrum, you have your very low income, your working poor. You know, I think it's nice to correlate that to what occupation do these people have, and these are your service folks. These are the folks that serve you food at any number of restaurants in town, the laborers who are the landscapers, or the masons who are working on all these great construction projects that are happening all over the city, and your administrative support, the folks who answer the phone for customer service, or check you in and out of the hospital or a doctor's office. And then the low-income workers, these are our skilled workers, again, earning up to $50,000 a year, so this is for a one-person household. And again, these are a lot of people who are working in the medical professions and the engineering professions at an entry level. And then lastly, our median income workers. These are the essential workers, as it says there. Certainly professionals who are kind of what we like to think of in the affordable housing world as sort of that middle part of the barbell. These are the folks that typically don't income qualify for affordable housing, and they don't make enough to qualify for a loan for a mortgage in a market rate unit. So who lives in Wheat Ridge by occupation? I thought this was an interesting way to sort of show order of magnitude, of the people who are working in Wheat Ridge, where do they fall in those sort of household low-income categories? And as you can see here on this infographic, the larger boxes are the ones that represent the highest population or number of people. And so the healthcare and social assistance, the retail trade, some manufacturing, obviously professional, scientific and technical services, those are still very much the folks who are in that very low income and low income band. And again, it's not representative of the entire city. There's actually quite a diversity of employment options here and people employed across the income spectrum, but the majority would sort of fall into those lower income wages. So why do we need affordable housing? Why is it important? Well, we don't live in a bubble. Wheat Ridge is certainly subject, as any town on the outskirts of Metro Denver, to the pressures of Denver. And this is something that we've seen across the metro area, that rents are rising, vacancy rates are declining, housing prices are going up, and wages are staying the same. So that's this externality, again, that I think, as you'll see through the slides, is starting to create potentially some affordable housing pressures here. A data point, a statistic that I thought was interesting, somewhat surprising, was who is in poverty in Wheat Ridge, and was surprised to see that the highest percentage are women that are between the ages of 45 and 54. Not being an economist, not having done a thorough market analysis, I can only speculate that these are single-parent households with children. And so I think it kind of bears contemplating what does that mean for the future, especially for children. What does that mean for the schools? And what does that mean, sort of broadly speaking, as you're sort of looking out the next 10 to 20 years as Wheat Ridge grows and changes over time? The other two categories that have high poverty rates are the 18 to 24-year-olds. These are what we call homeless youth. That's actually a federally defined term. 18 to 24-year-olds are those who, in large part, are, in some cases anyways, exiting foster care, or are just falling off that cliff when they, leave the security of their parents. They're off on their own, and maybe they were raised in a low-income family, and then they don't have the skills or the education or the jobs or the income to support themselves, and these individuals tend to fall into poverty. Stopping that at an early age, and we can talk about solutions there that are available, is important to help sort of, stop the trend towards longer-term chronic homelessness that costs our communities so much. Wheat Ridge, the current sort of snapshot of the rental market, I think, is interesting. There's actually quite a diversity of rental housing options at various different price points, which is good. If you look at the same sort of graph for Denver, it's definitely skewed towards the higher rents. So I think this is actually a sort of favorable condition for Wheat Ridge, in that there's still a lot of choice to people earning various incomes. Also, the year-over-year change in rent has only grown at 3%. In Denver, it's 6%. So, you're still tracking at what I think is more of a reasonable year-over-year gain. But, what does the future look like? And when I sort of kind of take the 30,000-foot view and look at this pressure that Denver is having on the communities that surround it, Denver's rental population is cost burdened to the extent of almost 30% of Denver renters are cost burdened, which means they're paying more than 30% of their rent or their income towards rent. An additional 30% of Denver renters are severely cost burdened, which means they're paying more than 50% of their income towards their rent. And the bubble can only withstand so much pressure before folks start moving out. And they've been going east for many, many years now to Aurora, but also Wheat Ridge is a great community. You have available housing stock that's quite a bit more affordable than what you could find in some other communities. These folks who are cost burdened, they're going to come here. Again, another sort of piecing together these little data points and what does it mean. Looking at Wheat Ridge's population, I noticed that the trend is towards a much higher percentage that are seniors, that are over the age of 65. I'm aware that there's quite a bit, actually, of income-restricted senior housing in Wheat Ridge, which is fantastic. Some folks definitely can and want to age in place. Others need to move into a more supportive environment where they're insulated a little bit from increases in property taxes or, the costs that come with maintaining a home. But of all the senior properties that I was able to look at online, they all have wait lists. So clearly there's an imbalance currently in the supply and the demand. I'm just going to skip over that. Another interesting sort of data point that kind of parallels a little bit with this external pressure of cost burden renter households in Denver is the fact that Wheat Ridge's incomes are on the rise. I mean, when you look at the top, incomes have increased 7% from 2016 to 2017, and the percent change in households earning $100,000 or more is the highest of the 5 communities surveyed other than Arvada. And so, again, I think folks are moving to Wheat Ridge with the higher incomes, and this will play into a conversation about what to do about this, but those houses that are, of an aging stock, they're kind of ripe for the picking for folks making, 6 figures who can qualify for a mortgage to come in and buy and fix up. You can obviously gain a lot more for your money. So we'll come back to that when we talk about preservation opportunities and making sure you're not sort of missing the boat to preserve that housing stock before it's, the community is priced out from preserving it. And hopefully this is a good transition into the conversation about what is the city council's role, what is the city of Wheat Ridge's role in addressing the need for affordable housing. And the bottom line here is there's tremendous opportunity for leverage. Local governments have a lot of, a breadth of opportunities before them. You can set policy, you can sort of, create goals, which sort of puts a stake in the ground in terms of your priorities and where you want to be. Creating funding opportunities, whether that's through taxes or inclusionary housing fees, these are all things that communities all around the state have been doing and are starting to do for those communities that are new to this challenge as well. Zoning and entitlement, obviously this is something that's really impactful that local governments can do. A lot of times we see that zoning laws run counter to what it takes to build affordable housing. And kind of peeling that back and looking at your own zoning code and figuring out, are we incentivizing this? Are we encouraging it? Are we making it very challenging, maybe impossible to see this happen on the scale, any scale that's meets your priorities? That's something that's very tangible that local governments can very much focus on and make a direct impact. But again, when it comes to funding and when it comes to other resources, leveraging the state government, the Colorado Division of Housing, it's unprecedented the amount of funding they have available right now for affordable housing at the state level. Again, like the sort of awareness and advocacy and support for affordable housing, I think is the highest that it's been in the 15 years I've lived in Colorado. And then again, at the federal government, we can talk about the low-income housing tax credit program and low-interest loans programs, but bottom line, the LIHTC program is the single most impactful thing that the federal government has probably done for affordable housing. This was written into the IRS code, Section 42. Spacing on how long ago that was, but several decades, and it's the one program that has consistently had bipartisan support, and it's been just a tremendous way to leverage the private sector to solve a social problem. There are a lot of barriers when it comes to developing affordable housing, and again, as a city, there are ways that you can try and lower those barriers or even remove those barriers. But just at a high level, the barriers that affordable housing developers face largely come down to these 5. Land costs and availability, especially in a market like today, is we compete with market rate developers, commercial developers, and the capital is still flowing into the state to buy up land and to reap the profits from investment. So that makes things challenging. Construction costs continue to go up. We have labor shortages here. That's a problem. There's material shortages as well. There's just a lot of competition. Makes projects harder to do. Makes projects, there's trade-offs. There's a lot more trade-offs when your construction costs continue to escalate. There's always entitlement risk to some degree. Very few communities create a very smooth, transparent, 3-month path from submit your concept design to you receive your building permit, and that's intentional. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity for community input for these types of developments, especially when they have government funding in them, and so that takes time. And again, that's something that developers do all the time, is try and mitigate those risks. The sources of equity financing, and this is specific to rental, low-income housing tax credit development projects, is competitive, and it's just getting more and more competitive. I think the Colorado tax credit program is oversubscribed anywhere from 3 to 4 to 1 every year for the cycle of funding. And so that really has raised the bar. Projects have gotten a lot better, a lot more sophisticated. It's really started to weed out the folks who are just kind of bringing in a project that's half-baked. What you get are really good, thoughtful projects where there's been a lot of community engagement, a lot of thought to energy efficiency or green building services for the residents who live in the property. So again, it's a barrier and it's a challenge, but it's also had sort of this other very positive effect. And then NIMBYism, which is not in my backyard. And again, very few communities don't have some NIMBYism. It's a matter of how, as a city, as a community, you address it, and that really gets to, again, some other sort of recommendations further into the slides. The good thing about doing affordable housing is that there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There are so many partners who are out there to leverage for information, education, referrals, whatever it is that you would need to sort of, increase your knowledge capacity about what this can mean for Wheat Ridge. You can find it here. You don't have to go far. The Colorado Housing and Finance Authority is probably one of the best state housing and finance authorities in the country. I've worked as a consultant for a lot of out-of-state affordable housing developers who develop all over Georgia, Arizona, California, Indiana, and they really like Colorado's process, and they really think it results in very high quality developments. Again, the Division of Housing right down the street, lots of funding available, educational resources, low interest loans on both the rental side and the for sale deed restricted side. Same with CHAFA, I should mention, they actually serve both as well. And then, whether it's lenders, tax credit syndicators, developers, which, from the private sector, nonprofits, housing authorities, there's a very wide and deep playing field of folks who this is what they do for a living, and they bring a lot of sophistication to it. So I've learned a little bit in the last couple hours about Wheat Ridge and its housing authority. I have some experience working with Jefferson County Housing Authority. I think housing authorities are also a tremendous asset and resource as you move forward, whether it's rental assistance, property tax exemption, or as a developer partner. There's a lot of ways that housing authorities can add value to affordable housing projects without a tremendous amount of investment in terms of staffing and that sort of thing. And then on the educational side and the partnership side, Colorado Housing Now is a great state agency. They host an annual conference. They do all kinds of trainings and seminars throughout the year. Again, it's just a fantastic way to network with folks throughout the state who are doing this and sort of learn and understand and really start to cater a solution that works best for your community. I'm just going to skip over these real quick so we can talk about some project specifics. So just to give you a little snapshot of our portfolio, Urban Ventures started doing affordable, deed-restricted for sale units in Denver back in 2005. And this is Monarch Mills. Interesting, notable that 80% of the units are deed-restricted affordable and 20% are market rate. Usually those percentages are flipped. Susan Powers actually lives in one of the market rate condos here and has since the project was built. And I think it's a good testament to the stereotype that we sometimes face that, market rate, condo owners can't or don't want to live with folks who, bought in at an affordable rate. Like somehow these two populations are just entirely incompatible. And that's proved not to be the case here with this project. The incomes are restricted, again, more towards that essential worker income band, 80 to 95% of the area median income. Another interesting example project, Fire Clay Lofts, and this one is in the Rhino Arts District. A lot more complexity associated with this development. It was an adaptive reuse of a historic warehouse, and then there was also new construction of condos and townhomes, and then there's a little bit of commercial on site as well. And this one, again, 166 units is a big project, but 20% of these units are deed-restricted affordable and 80% are market rate. And again, that's more common, and it's always a function of subsidy. So this is a picture of Fire Clay Lofts. It kind of reminded me I was at the ULI Legacy Awards, and I'm so sorry I forgot the name of the school. Fruitdale Lofts, beautiful project. Congratulations on that. Again, I think an interesting case study in what to do with these properties that that the city. And again, I don't know all the mechanics of how the transaction came into play, but for a city to have a property that can sell below market rate to an affordable housing developer, I mean that's an incredible opportunity that as a city you can leverage and offer to someone to get, again, something else in return, which would be affordable housing. ARIA Denver is a really ambitious project. This has been in the works for 12 years. It's still not complete. It's a 17.5 acre master plan community at Federal Boulevard and 52nd Avenue in the Chaffee Park neighborhood in Denver. And it, I think, is a really good example. There's a woman who made a comment earlier about not everybody wants to live in multifamily housing. Not everybody wants to live in an apartment, and I can appreciate that. I've lived in apartments. I now live in a single family house. There are different product types for different stages in your life, and people just have an affinity to living in very different environments. So what ARIA was able to accomplish was to offer a lot of diversity in terms of both the income served and the product type. It's also a really great mix of rental and for sale. I mean, this is like everything but the kitchen sink kind of a development, including the adaptive reuse of a former convent. So the convent's the picture at the bottom. It's condominiums in there, beautiful. It's just an amazing building, sort of sits in the middle of the property. There's a huge farm that a local nonprofit manages, and anybody who lives in the community can help participate and they can grow, but they distribute the food to low-income folks around the community. There's also market rate townhouses, and Habitat for Humanity has bought a parcel of land and is doing single-family, deed-restricted affordable. And then there are also two standalone rental communities that were developed with low-income housing tax credits. So, and then a Starbucks and a Bank of America, a little commercial strip. So again, it's got everything you would want if you have land. This would be a fantastic sort of model representation of what you could accomplish and what you could do with it. And I'd be happy to give you a tour. This is just some pictures of the farm. And then, again, this is not part of Urban Ventures portfolio, but I spent 4 years working as a developer for Boulder Housing Partners, which is a housing authority for the city of Boulder. And while there, was fortunate to work on 3 different projects that served 3 very different populations and were very unique in their product type. Again, higher density. These are all between 30 and 60 units. The one at the top was 31 units, and the one in the middle and the one at the bottom are both 59 and 60 units respectively. The one property exclusively served the homeless. This is Boulder's first permanent supportive housing development for chronically homeless households. Another was both age and income restricted to seniors. That's the one at the bottom, that's Highmar. And then the one in the middle was a redevelopment of a former mobile home park. And every unit that was displaced was replaced with a duplex. Very sustainable, very environmentally efficient, have a big community center that sort of anchors the whole community in the middle. I think a third of the families who left the mobile home park moved back, and this was years after they were initially displaced. So again, I think it's good to keep an open mind. There are a lot of different product types. It would be disingenuous to me to say that you could build single-family detached affordable homes affordably. It takes a tremendous amount of subsidy to do that. So I think, again, it's just a balancing of priorities, but also an acknowledgement of the financial environment in which we're operating. So this is sort of my last slide that I'll leave you with in terms of recommendations. Preservation is at the top of the list for a reason. There's no time like the present to find ways to preserve your existing housing stock, keep it affordable, keep the folks that are in those homes that want to stay in their homes, whether they're right on the verge of poverty and maybe not making their rent payment and would have to, be displaced and move out, or seniors who are on fixed income as well, and then there are certainly lots of folks in between. Again, as I mentioned before, you have so many partners in the metro area that you can leverage. The affordable housing development community is vast. There's a lot of local players. There's also a ton of national players who so badly want to be here. At a local level, I would say creating some kind of a strategic plan, really getting a handle on the data, what's happening in Wheat Ridge, what are the trends, who's most in need, and through that you'll, be able to extrapolate where you should be putting your priorities. Is it senior housing? Is it homeless housing? Is it workforce housing? Is it all of those? Having that data and having a plan that can be publicly available, that really starts again to sort of put that stake in the ground of like, this is where we are. And then as a community, through surveys or public input, find out where do people want to go. I've seen in other communities how anchoring that is in terms of saying, the community spoke, affordable housing is a top 2 priority, and so of our limited time and expertise, that's where we're going to invest, a lot of our energy and resources. And then again, down the list, these are all the things that you could do to, again, facilitate the process, but bottom line, advocating for affordable housing, be consistent in your messaging. The folks who know how to do it on a technical level, they will come, but they want to see that they're welcome. There's a lot of places where affordable housing can be built, and having a community say, we're open for business, this is what we want to do, this is how we will partner with you to make it happen, that really opens the doors. So. Thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions of Ms. Weaver?
You're welcome.
One of the things that I'm trying to do Sorry. One of the things that, it's hard to face in and face you at the same time. I think one of the things that we're struggling with here in Wheat Ridge is we want affordable housing. And at the same time, there is a want to keep large lots, single-family houses, and an aversion to this word high density. Can you talk about if those, how do you, because in my mind, we have to move to some higher density to get that affordability, because a single-family home is way beyond the cost of the numbers that you were showing. And I was just hoping you could speak to that, because I'm sure you've worked in communities that are sort of going through the same struggle.
Yeah, well, just working in Boulder, I mean, that's always the conflict, right? There's this social desire, this, desire for equity and making sure that people of all incomes across the socioeconomic spectrum can live, and yet at the same time not wanting to sacrifice the built environment and the views and sort of the small town feel. And so these two things do run into conflict with each other frequently. I would say, this sounds silly, but look at your parking lots. Look at the areas where you already have density. Go for those areas where you, and Longmont did this, a great example. So the city of Longmont said, okay, yes, the economics say that in order to do affordable housing cost effectively, it needs to be of a certain density, higher density housing. Where can we incentivize that type of development? So they looked on their major corridors. They looked at, commercial areas where it might make sense to fill in some housing to, sort of activate the street or create a more 24/7 environment between the commercial uses and the residential uses. Parking lots are a great example of, this available land that are typically in kind of commercial areas that if your zoning code could support it, you could sort of drive the development to those areas and not see your larger lots that, kind of retain that rural feel turn into higher density developments, which again, I know there will be backlash from that. And I think you can have both.
Additional questions, Ms. Hobby?
Thank you for your presentation. On one of your slides, you had said government's role in affordable housing, and you had zoning and entitlements, and in parentheses, you put density bonus. So is that something where you see like a typical project could have this many units, but if we tell them that we want them to add affordable housing to it, then we will allow them to build a few extra units for that to happen? Is that what that means?
Yes. Yes, and so oftentimes, there's so many ways to come at this. Like, what usually people see from the outside, right? The mass and the scale of a building is what's most important, right? Like, how does this building relate to this building, and is there a nice transition between the high density to medium to low density? So you can, on a single site, keep your massing and the scale of the building, basically the building envelope, the same. Maybe for a market rate developer, the density would be 30 units, 30 apartments, 30 condos is what you could fit in there. But if you said if it were developed with 25% of those units to be affordable, or 50%, whatever your target is, you can get a density bonus and add another 10 units. What will end up happening is that affordable developer will probably still have to maintain the same building envelope, so the building itself doesn't get any larger, but the units can get more efficient. They can get smaller, maybe less bedrooms, less amenities, maybe all the amenities become congregated in one area, like one exercise room instead of dens in all the units. So there's a way to encourage affordable housing through density bonuses without making a building larger. And that just helps with the economics too. I mean, I wish I had brought an example pro forma of how like a tax credit finance rental development comes together. But again, there's essentially a fixed cost, again, because the financing is competitive. So everybody needs to sort of hit at the same cost per unit or cost per square foot. So the more units you add, you can bring that number down and make it competitive.
Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you for that explanation. And one thing I wanted to also ask is, we're at a point in our community where we have a lot of kind of housing projects that are starting, especially up at our TOD site and then Clear Creek Crossing. And at what point do we tell developers we want this much in workforce housing? Like, if they've already come to us and we've already kind of looked at their project, but they haven't broke ground on it, they haven't necessarily got their finances all in line in it, and we go back to them and say, we want a certain percentage in workforce housing, what do you think the outcome of that conversation would look like?
Well, I think anytime a municipality reaches out to a developer to sort of say, here's our goals and this is what we'd like to see you accomplish, tell us if you think that's feasible, that's usually and should be met with a really positive reception, because ultimately what a developer wants to do is build something that the community supports and that the community needs, and you all are the closest to that and knowing what the community needs and will be timeless for the life of the project. Also, I think developers want to not just do one project. They want to establish relationships and come back and do more, and be a stronger player in the community. So I think at sort of the high level of just that kind of openness to the dialogue would be met positively. In terms of workforce, depending on what you mean by that, in a tax credit financed rental project, it used to be that incomes had to be restricted to 60% AMI and below, and now we've got income averaging. We can push the incomes up to 80% AMI. So that's a game changer, because that means that there are now financing tools available to serve folks who meet that 60 to 80% AMI, which didn't exist before.
Mr. Matthews?
Thank you. I find a little bit of a vicious circle here. I've read an article here and it says, oops, I just got lost. Having made housing unaffordable, many cities have responded by making the problem worse. Denver has passed, a North Denver metro suburb of Longmont is considering an affordable housing mandate that requires developers to sell or rent 10% or more of the homes they build below their cost. This leads to fewer homes being built, which lowers the supply and raises the cost for a few people, while pushing up the price of housing for everyone else. So we already have a shortage of housing, and if we start raising the price of housing, we have less affordable housing. So how do you respond to that, kind of the snake eating its own tail?
Yeah, I mean, so I live in Boulder, and I am kind of astonished at how I think in Boulder specifically the pendulum has swung too far. So the burden that has been placed in the form of cash in lieu and other taxes on market rate developers in Boulder, whether that's commercial or residential, I mean, that has pushed the price of housing so high, right? Because the developer is going to find a way to absorb that cost, right? And that's usually in the form of higher rent or a higher sale price. That while it has pushed more, capital into the city's coffers to then go and use that to fund affordable housing, it's kind of like, again, like your snake analogy, that the two ends of the barbell, like this middle piece has just gotten squeezed. And so it has, I think it's, again, caused a problem that wasn't intended, which is push the very high income housing to be so high that it's a very narrow band of who can build that and afford to buy that or rent that. And while it's created more funding to fund the low-income housing, it's sort of left everyone in the middle without a resource and without any available supply. So I think it's a real it's a real challenge. I don't know if anybody's totally cracked the nut on solving it exactly, but it's something to be mindful of, is that you can't push the cost so much to the market rate developers without, sort of creating a backlash and a burden. So there is a balance. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is for Wheat Ridge, but it's without a doubt complex and challenging.
We'll go to Mr. Urban, then I'll come back.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and I appreciate our discussion around affordable housing, because I do think that it's needed. One question I had was with the nexus between affordable housing and the construction defect laws. And in Wheat Ridge, the last condominiums that were built, I think, were in 2005. And so as much as I think the housing stock around affordable housing and the need to provide housing for our less fortunate, the elderly and the like, it seems like when we talk about our barbell, we're missing that middle bar. We've got a lot of nice luxury homes, and we've got a lot of apartment complexes, but that middle attainable housing seems to be missing. And it seems to me, and maybe you could speak to this a little bit, about the impact of the construction defect laws as it relates to our ability to provide a simple or a modest condominium for folks to purchase.
I mean, I think it's shut down the condo market effectively, and folks are waiting for that to change. A lot of apartment developers are starting to design and construct apartments with the future purpose of condo converting. So I think that's a positive sign that we see that change will occur eventually, and so might as well start to build a product type that would position well as a for-sale condo, hopefully in the near future.
Mr. Matthews?
We've had several experts tell us that our city, we actually have a plethora of affordable housing, and that we need to be attracting more higher-end residents. They call them strong families, families that can afford to live in Wheat Ridge, if you will. How do we reconcile the fact that we need more high-end families and already have a lot of affordable housing? I mean, what are we here to say today? Why are you specifically here to counsel us on?
That's a great question.
Since you're a developer and develop high-density housing,
yeah,
you kind of have a dog in the fight.
Maybe to some degree, but certainly not currently in Wheat Ridge. But I think, again, I think the data reflects that you are attracting these strong families. One of the slides with the incomes rising, 128% for those earning over $100,000 a year. That's a really strong indicator that you are attracting families with higher earnings, and that's a good thing, right? I mean, what we all want in our communities is balance. So whether there is a true need for affordable housing or you're good and you don't need any more, I can't answer that. I think oftentimes what we look to are market studies to just show what is the landscape, where is there a need, maybe where is the supply functionally obsolete. If it's 20, 30, 40 years old housing, some properties that I, again, sort of found online were 1-bedroom, 1-bath units with no air conditioning or window units. That's not how we build housing these days. So there's probably opportunities for repositioning some of those aging assets, maybe, again, those that were developed at a very low density, developing a second building that's still on the parking lot or some underutilized green space. I think there are ways to sort of chip away at the problem without going just wholesale to one end of the spectrum, just developing high-density 100-unit projects or, foreclosing all future affordable housing options and just, trying to attract families with higher incomes. I think there are certainly ways that you can do both.
Ms. Stozman?
Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to make a comment about appreciate how balanced this data is and your candor in answering a lot of the questions. It was interesting to see that we actually do have a lot of choices in Wheat Ridge, and you kind of highlighted that as far as housing, diverse housing on all ends of availability. I would like to highlight, I think it doesn't have a page number, but the poverty by age and gender. So with the exception of one age group, women typically seem to be more along the poverty line, and that fits in really well with Jefferson County's data as far as homelessness in our county. So we see a lot of women and children that are homeless, even though we see more single males panhandling, and that seems to kind of create the narrative as far as what we see. The truth behind it is women and children. They tend to be the most homeless. And really, when we're talking about affordable housing, I think we do have to strike a balance. So, you can't have it be so affordable and then so expensive that the middle class really loses out. And that's kind of what we've seen in San Francisco and in other areas where we've tried to subsidize this housing, and it's increased the market rate exponentially. So I'm really glad that you touched on that as far as Boulder goes, and you recognize that is an issue that we need to be taking into consideration. So I had asked for this to be put on the study session, and really I think you touched on kind of my thoughts. We are seeing a lot of development come into Wheat Ridge, and we are really going to need to see that balance as far as increasing the supply, and because we are in such high demand, and allowing for the cost to come down and be affordable for single families. I know that we want to attract strong family households into our community, and I think that this data supports that we are definitely doing that. But we also want Wheat Ridge to be accessible to all, and we want it to be a community where someone like me, who's a single mother and works full-time and thankfully has a second job, basically, to allow for me to live in this community. And so we have to be mindful of our demographics as well. We have a high senior population that has truly benefited from our subsidized housing. Fruitdale Lofts is a great example of workforce housing. We've seen another presentation by ArtSpace for artists in a worker space. So I definitely like that we are having these conversations, and I'm very thankful for you coming in and presenting.
Yeah, thank you. And, I'm a type of affordable housing that's near and dear to my heart is for homeless households. And I worked on a developments under construction now in Boulder for homeless youth, the 18 to 24-year-olds, and the data is so powerful and compelling, and I think it translates to poor single parent households with children who are either in poverty or on the verge of homelessness, and that when you you're so fortunate to have so many social service providers in your community whose expertise you can leverage, and you pair them up with the housing. They literally move right in, and these case managers offer support services with the goal of transitioning these families and these young people on into a life of independence. And the cost savings over the course of that individual's life is upwards of $50,000 or $60,000 a year back to the community, and not having to pay for, the continual cycling through all the safety nets, whether it's detox or jails or, social support systems that our communities need to have to keep those folks from, again, falling into homelessness. So lots of opportunity there. That type of housing is very much on the radar for the state and at the federal level, and there's a lot of resources out there in terms of capital dollars to leverage for projects like that.
Mr. Goff?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And maybe to add on to what Councilmember Dozman mentioned too, and to answer Mr. Matthews' question, he had a good question. Why is Shannon here this evening? And it was brought by Leah and a former council member, but It's really to start the conversation and to have a conversation. I hear it in the community endlessly on what are you doing about affordable housing. And it's also to define it. What does that mean for Wheat Ridge, right? I don't think we know, and I think hopefully you learn tonight that it's affordable. Means a lot of different things, and I think we need to figure out what that means for Wheat Ridge. Do we want more, less, or what kind of mix? Again, we hear it from the community endlessly. On the most recent resident survey, I think the score was pretty low on the ranking of affordability of housing in Wheat Ridge. But again, what does that mean for those people that are responding to that? I don't know. I think a lot of times when you talk about affordability, people go straight to Section 8 program, right? And I don't think that's necessarily 100% of what it is, obviously. So, really, we're not really looking for any direction this evening, but if you have any direction that you want us to continue investigating or moving forward with, or maybe this is a strategic plan discussion when we have our next strategic planning retreat in January, February. So I didn't get time to set that up, but.
Well, thank you. I am suggesting that we've only heard one side of the argument. We've had a Schwinn dealer come here to tell us we need more bike lanes. And I would hope that we have a balanced discussion before we take any kind of action on affordable housing and see the whole spectrum, and not only just in general, but the statistics within our own city and where we're at. And do we really need more affordable housing, or do we have to take different steps to handle our specific problems?
I totally agree. And we have all kinds of sources of data that we've already pulled together with the NRS. Actually, some of the information in this presentation came from our draft NRS report that you'll be getting soon. And we did a housing diversification strategy study several years ago that has some information into it too. So I think we're pulling together a diverse amount of information about what does this mean for Wheat Ridge, and I think we need to continue talking about it.
Ms. Baker, I had a question. We have a good deal of rental housing in our community, and there's some desire to be able to have more home ownership within our community. Is that a different discussion? Is it a part of this discussion?
No, I think it's all part of the same pie, right? So as you start to peel back the layers, you realize there's a lot of different ways to define affordable housing. There's a lot of different strategies out there to tackle affordable housing. My particular background is on the rental side, specifically the low-income housing tax credit finance side of affordable housing. That's what I know best. There are others out there who know the deed restricted for sale model better. Habitat for Humanity being one of the best examples and organizations whose mission it is to do just that. Elevations Land Trust, also an innovative model where they're out buying land and sort of taking that piece out of the equation and letting the house itself remain affordable without the cost of the land being carried by the resident or by the tenant. I would encourage you to talk to those folks. Those housing, the deed-restricted for sale models are trickier, and because there isn't this huge federal program that's sort of pushing equity into it like there is with the low-income housing tax credit program. But there's been a lot of innovation lately in the metro area, and I think again, it's one of those things. It's always best to get out in front of the issue, know where you are, know where you're going, and start to know what strategies you can put in place either for your term or for future terms so that they can build on that. Because these changes move slowly, and yet, as we've seen from the graphs, sometimes the macroeconomic forces move much more quickly than we can keep up with. So yes, I think explore all options and avenues, and then, of course, tie it back to what the community wants and supports. That's the only way it'll get done.
Thank you. Any further questions or discussion on this item? Well, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate your work on this.
Thank you for having me.
We've been at this about 2 hours. Why don't we take about a 10-minute break? Okay, thank you. I think we'll reconvene our meeting at this time and move to item number 4. This is amended and restated service plan for the Ward TOD Metropolitan District. Mr. Goff, do you want to introduce this for us?
Yeah, very quickly. In 2012, City Council approved this metropolitan district for a different development that was proposed at that time. So as you know, the property has been purchased by Toll Brothers, and they're planning to do a 200-unit residential unit project up there now. So the service plan needs to be needs to match the development. So they're required to do an amendment to that service plan. So that's why they're here this evening. So Megan Murphy with White Bear is here this evening. You've seen other representatives from this law firm. They also worked on the Yarrow Gardens Metropolitan District. So she's going to be here to quickly give you a presentation on why this is being amended.
Thank you. City Council members, Megan Murphy from White Bear Ankley to Naka and Waldron. That's Murphy. Do you need my address? Yeah? Okay. It's 15834 East Otero Avenue, Centennial, 80112. But I was born at Lutheran Medical Center, if that counts for anything. If that counts at all, don't hold it against me. So the city manager tells me you guys are familiar with Metro District, so I've got a lot of introductory slides that for time I'll just skip right over to what we're talking about tonight and the need for an amended service plan, but I'm happy to go back or answer any questions about Metro Districts generally. Spacebar? Arrow keys. Arrow keys. Thank you. Okay, this is the project that you guys know as the Ridge at Ward Station. The name it was given in 2012 was Ward TOD. We are planning to change the name after the service plan is approved. That's a simple court process, but it will make it easy for residents to mirror the service plan, the Metro District, and what they know the project as one. So that'll be completed after the service plan is approved. This is a concept plan. It sounds like you guys are familiar with this project, and I understand plat has already been approved. So the real reason that we're here tonight is because, as Mr. Goff mentioned, they have a service plan right now that just doesn't match the vision. The service plan was 400 plus units, a lot more commercial development, and parking for RTD's light rail stop were all envisioned as throughout the text of the service plan. So Toll Brothers is just doing something that's totally different. They're doing 200 residential units, a smaller mixed-use parcel that the vision isn't quite finalized yet on, and no parking for RTD. We've been working closely with RTD to get their parcel, which is just to the right where it says RTD parking. That's currently in the district right now. They don't want to be in the district, and we don't want them in the district. So it's a perfect meeting of the minds. We are working on the paperwork to make that happen. As soon as it does, we'll let your city attorney know. But that's used to be the vision, not the vision today. So because of these changes, Colorado law requires you to be in substantial compliance with the service plan. They can't be. We're going to present this new amended service plan that does have substantial compliance with what Toll is doing. These are, I think, the highlights, what you probably really care about when you're talking about changing the service plan. Debt, taxes, what does this mean for people living in Wheat Ridge? So the current service plan was a much bigger project. That's why it had the $50 million debt limit. This is a much smaller project, so we're negotiating against ourselves, if you will, to drop the debt limit down to $25 million. The maximum debt mill levy is 50 mills. We're proposing 60 mills, which matches Yarrow Gardens to be consistent with other new projects in Wheat Ridge. The financial plan also projects 60 mills. However, the estimated cost of public improvements is around $5 million, so it's doubtful that we'll need to it's very, very doubtful we'll need to max that out. The operations and maintenance mill levy is currently unlimited and will remain so. The huge benefit of this is part of the vision for making the Ridge at Ward Station work. They need the service plan, the Metro District to fund the public improvements. The main two improvements that you'll see on the ground are the park, which is kind of as you come in off of the main road, there's a bigger park, and then what's called a paseo, which I will describe terribly, but I'll attempt to. It's underground drainage with a sidewalk, a nice sidewalk you walk next to. Very walkable-ish. That's my vision of it. So that's the presentation. I'm happy to go slower, back up, answer questions, comments, concerns. This is scheduled for May 13th for public hearing, so I'd love to hear if you think there'll be a surprise for me next Monday night, or get a gauge of what you're interested in with this project.
Okay, we'll open for questions with Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I'm reading through this, it appears as there's 3 separate metro districts within this area. Why are there 3 separate districts?
I can't speak to why 3 districts were organized in 2012. The vision, from what I can tell from the text of the service plan, although we didn't represent the project at that time nor the developer, is that 1 district would act as a financing district, 1 for residential, 1 for commercial. When Toll Brothers took on the project and is in the process of closing on the sale, we have 3 districts, and it takes a little bit of time to dissolve any of them. So that's why you'll see in the service plan, District 1 is all the residential units, and 2 and 3 are stacked on top of that commercial or mixed-use parcel. If Toll Brothers develops that commercial or mixed-use parcel as retail on the bottom, residential on the top, we could horizontally stack Districts 2 and 3 to prevent an overlapping mill levy, but we don't know what they're going to do with that parcel yet, so we just put 2 and 3 in the corner on the commercial mixed use, and number 1 is all the residents.
And so are districts 2 and 3 providing the same services? And
Absolutely not. They would just be covering the commercial mixed use parcel. That's their only boundary, so very small. And then if the commercial mixed use just ends up being commercial, it'll just be District 2 or District 3, and Toll has asked us to dissolve the remaining district. Right now, when we don't know the final plan for development, it's premature to dissolve the district.
so why wouldn't we just have 1 district cover the entire area?
Sure.
As opposed to 2 different ones, 1 for residential, 1 for commercial?
Because residential and commercial properties are assessed at different ratios, we're required to impose a uniform mill levy across whatever properties in the district. So if the commercial and the residential were in 1 district, you'd have property assessed at 7.2% and assessed at 29% for commercial, paying the same 60 mills, which would be an undue burden on commercial development. So we put commercial in its own district so we can lower the mill levy since their assessment ratio is so much higher.
And so for that second district, those, who would be the members of that district then, of that commercial district? The 1 property owner, or?
On day 1, it'd be the 1 property owner. If it ends up being residential on the top and commercial on the bottom, just imagine 2 levels for very simple. District 3 could be commercial on the bottom, and they would have a lower mill levy since they're assessed at a higher rate. Commercial units on the top or second level would have a higher mill levy since they're residential, since they would be assessed at a lower rate.
Okay.
That makes sense? You always need to separate the uses based on how they are assessed.
Certainly. So why wouldn't District 1 overlap that entire area? Why even have that 3rd district at all?
So we came into it, for lack of a better term, we have 3 kids, and we need to figure out where to put them right now. And once we figure that out, then we'll, I'll come back to you, Toll Brothers will, with their commercial plan, and then you'll know the vision for those 2 districts. Right now, we already have them. We've got to put them somewhere, so we put 2 and 3 on top of the commercial parcel. We can't dissolve a district fast enough to make it work with where they are in development.
Okay, thank you.
Additional discussion, questions? I had one in your service plan on page 3. You have a statement that says the city will provide fire protection and emergency response services. Actually, the city doesn't provide that.
Okay.
So that I
We
think.
better change that
Is
then.
that right? That's probably a fire protection district or,
Okay, I'll work with your attorney, Mr. Dahl, to get that fixed.
okay?
Page 3,
Page 3, item number 2, fire protection limitation.
great, thank you for bringing that to my attention.
That last sentence.
Okay.
Additional questions or discussion?
It's Arvada.
It's Arvada Fire.
Okay, I will take all the blame for that and work with Mr. Dahl to get that corrected.
Okay.
You can blame Mr. Dahl. He's not here.
Additional discussion? I noticed in another area, this is under C on other powers on page 7, that without amending the service plan, I believe you're able to defer or forego or reschedule or restructure the financing and/or construction of the public improvements. Does this give you the ability to forego all of the powers that you have, or?
Yes, the service plan is not a promise of development, it is rather a box with which in we must operate. And the reason that this language has started appearing in service plans and will continue to appear in service plans is because of the very famous case Landmark versus Marin. So we represent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of metropolitan districts that have a lot of different service plans, and some of the language was being interpreted to say you're required to finance at 7%, because that's what your financing plan says, or you're required to sell 250 units. When the market tanked, that didn't happen. And we were caught in this kind of catch-22 where you come to the city and say, this is what we envision, but we can't make a promise. I don't know what the market's going to do. I don't know if Toll will sell 200 units at such and such a price. So this language says, we're hoping to do this financing plan, but we are not promising you that this is what it will happen. This is our best guess from the experts today.
Thank you. Additional discussion, questions? We probably need a do we need a consensus to move this forward for action next week?
If you'd like, yes, we could take a consensus.
Do we have a consensus to move this forward? Okay. We have a consensus to move this forward, so I guess we'll see you in a week.
Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes the formal items on the agenda. We will now go to elected officials' reports. Raise your hand if you've got a good report for us. Even not a good report.
Thank you. Good night.
Any comments tonight?
I did want to tell the public there is a table set up in the clerk's office that has just a gob of information about the Wadsworth Widening Project. There are, I think, 15 small booklets that are separate reports on everything from right-of-way, air quality, traffic transition. I can't even think of all the names of them. And then there are two very large notebooks. One is on the environmental assessment study, and the other one is on the historical properties big thing that we had to go through. And those are very, very large documents in 3-ring binders. And there are also maps and diagrams, and there is an envelope for comments. And so the public is welcome to come in and look through these documents and reports, and if they want to, and provide comments. And it's been there, I think, a good 2 weeks, I think, and not one single person has come in, but they're there, and there's just gobs and gobs of information that your tax dollars paid for.
And would you tell us once again where these are located?
Oh, it's in the clerk's office, so if folks just come in the front door and turn left, and go through the glass doors to the counter, and it's right there. So
Okay, so at City Hall?
yeah, at City Hall
On 29th
yeah.
Avenue in the
We're
clerk's
lonely.
office,
Come see us. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
And Mr. Mayor, to add on to that, this too, we'll be hosting a public meeting on the environmental assessment for the Wadsworth project on May 22nd from 5 to 8 p.m. Let's see, here at the City Hall. And there'll be presentations at 5:30 and 7 p.m. that evening. But it's a public open house from 5 to 8 p.m. with presentations at 5:30 and 7 p.m.
Thank you. Ms. Dozman?
Sorry, along that same track, there is actually a public meeting tomorrow night, Tuesday, May 7th as well, that's hosted by the Chamber of Commerce. It's going to be a panel discussion on Wadsworth Boulevard, and it's at the Grange off 38th and High Court, and it's from 7 to 9 p.m. tomorrow.
Thank you. Ms. Weaver? You're
Keep forgetting this, sorry. I just wanted to thank the city and their efforts towards the opening of the G line. That just, I'm not sure how much of was done, but it was just a really exciting
we were out there pounding the railroad
time.
spikes.
Yeah, so thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to say the G line is open, so it's been a long time coming for our community, but it was a great opening. It's a great facility to have. I think it's going to provide a lot of benefits and a lot opens up sort of a new area of our town that's really exciting. I would also like to thank very much the Wheat Ridge High School and their STEM program for hosting a beautiful gala on Saturday night. A number of council people were there, and myself, my wife and myself joined. We had a great time. And I'll tell you the STEM program at Wheat Ridge High School is second to none. I mean, it is a world-class program, and we should be very proud of that. Mr. Matthews?
Yes, thank you. I'd have loved to have been there. I was in Seattle last week, and unfortunately, I just couldn't make that or the G line opening. But perhaps Mr. Goff has some clarifications. We got a notice that there's still going to be some whistle testing once in a while on the G line, and I don't want to surprise our folks out there. Could you illuminate on that a little bit?
Good question. See if I can pull up that. I can't. It was for just a short period of time, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to make them aware of it. That it's not it's kind of like an aftershock with an earthquake. That there's just going to be a little bit of something, and it's not coming back full time.
And they have not removed all of the crossing attendant guards on the crossings yet either. So it's the line is open, but it's not in final form.
Yeah, but supposedly it's just some testing for the FRA. Federal Railroad, whatever, and it's going to be at night, unfortunately. There'll be some blowing of the horns, but...
Yeah, they said they got to conduct further testing. DTP has shut down the positive train control and operate with automatic train control in place. This means that on Thursday and Friday nights from midnight to 4 a.m., trains may need to sound their horns on the G line as they pass through a grade crossing. Horns could sound during the last few train trips each night. Trying to see what dates that was. Yeah, was that just free rides unavailable? Yeah, I think that might be done already. I think that was May 4th. If the testing is not completed by 4 a.m. Saturday, May 4th, testing will be extended and monitored on a day-to-day basis. I haven't heard if it's been completed, but it was supposed to be completed by Saturday.
Just want to let the folks know it's not going to be
temporary.
Permanent going on.
All right. Is there any more business to come before the council at this study session? Seeing none, let us adjourn. Thank you.